Today on the 1012 podcast, myself and Jamie Steyer-Johnson are taking a look at the Big 12 women's basketball standings, the teams that surprise, the teams that contend, and our projections moving forward. Plus, Kelley Ford, a.k.a. KFord Ratings, joins us to talk about the men's side of hoops and his weekly power ratings coming up on the 1012.
This episode is brought to you by Love Hurts. Kiwi Kwan has had quite a career, from childhood roles in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and The Goonies to a recent Academy Award win for Everything Everywhere All at Once. But now Ki finally stars as a leading man in the film Love Hurts. Love Hurts is the perfect date night movie with its mix of over-the-top action, comedy, and a ton of heart. Love Hurts, only at theaters February 7th.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first, like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Welcome to the 1012, the podcast that covers all 16 teams in the Big 12 Conference. We're the flagship show, the 1012 Network. Find every show in the network at 1012network.com. And of course, we are partners with Sports Social, Europe's biggest sports podcast network. I'm your host, Phillip. Thank you for joining us. We are back. Look, it's been January. We have to take a step back. And then, when you have 3 kids who get the flu and you get the flu and the whole house is sick and birthday parties for 5-year-olds, and then you randomly decide one night after not being sick anymore but still kind of having crap to spike to 103.7 fever for apparently no reason for like 6 hours, and then all is well for the next few days. Stuff just happens. And it's why we haven't talked basketball. It's why we haven't had a basketball episode. It's why the conference schedule is as deep into it as it is, and we're finally, for the first time, going to have a Monday episode since Christmas and talk about what? Big 12 hoops. Now, joining me today is not Andy Mitz, because the Chiefs are playing right now. We are recording this. The Chiefs are tied with the Bills at 29 with 6:15 left in the game, so Andy is not here. But
probably the best for all
it's
of
probably
us.
for the best. He would be so what? Huh? What? I'm sorry. I wasn't even paying attention. So, joining us is that voice you heard. That is Jamie Steyer-Johnson, JSJ, as we lovingly or belovingly, I don't know, call her here. Yeah. Again, still getting over it. I sound like I'm getting over crap. So, here we are.
Yeah, that's me. We're here. Look, I've been fortunately able to get a lot of my talking hoops fix since kind of added on to the slate. Got the weekly show over at Her Hoops Stats, but getting back to the core of things, getting back to my first loves, getting to talk some Big 12 basketball. Never gonna complain about that at all, and especially after the weekend that we had, the week that we had. It's been a very, very crazy conference season up to this point, but it has ramped up to a different level very recently. So if we were going to have some time off, and if we were going to have a little bit of a delay talking conference hoops for the first time, this is a really good time to get the ball rolling and start to at least attempt to make some sense of what we're seeing. Although that's kind of a tall order because things are chaotic at best.
We're going to start talking the women. We are going to talk men's side with our good friend Kelley Ford, a.k.a. KFord Ratings. I locked up an interview with him last week and intended to have it on Thursday. Again, as I mentioned, random fever spike, birthday, tired. So it's dropping today. Okay, it's coming out today. Kelley will be fine. It will be fine. We're going to break down his ratings, his power ratings as he posts them each week. and gets a lot of pushback on them, way more than football, but that's not terribly shocking. So we talk about those and a few other things as well, but we're going to start with some women's hoops because we have Jamie here. And if we're going to have Jamie here, we're going to talk about the things that she knows like the back of her hand. And that is this Big 12 conference on the women's side. TCU sits atop the standings at 8-1, followed by Kansas State at 7-1, Oklahoma State at 7-2, Baylor 6-2, West Virginia 6-3. It is a very interesting Big 12 season. I mean, let's start with rinse repeat. Ayoka Lee is out for a while with injury, which sucks. It just it sucks. But is it mean for me to say like it starts to suck less when it happens over and over again? Like it's just like still sucks the same amount, but also like
you feel for her and it's sad, but it's not surprising. And so when something's not surprising, it's hard to be as emotionally affected by it. I do want to give Kansas State a lot of credit because I had been critical at times, especially last year, with the way that they had handled some of their rotations and just specifically her minutes, where it seemed like they were kind of sticking their heads in the sand at times. And of course, I'm not in the conversations with the training staff, but when you have that many knee injuries, it just seems prudent to try to limit opportunities to get hurt, especially when that then extends into ankle injuries, foot injuries. And she was just running all over the place, playing a whole lot of minutes in a whole lot of games where maybe she didn't need to. And then in games where she did need to, you're like, well, you also played 30 minutes in the last 2 games. So where is this all coming from? And then ending up injured on and off again last year. So made it nearly halfway through the conference slate this year before, I believe, breaking a bone in her foot about a week ago. And so certainly a shame, as I've said many, many, many times. Love Ayoka Lee, love her game. Really enjoy getting to watch her play. But again, unfortunately, just not particularly surprising. So for Kansas State, they shored up a little bit of depth, brought in some players in the portal, as we've talked about a little bit. But certainly not really replacements for Ayoka, because there is no one that is a replacement for Ayoka in the slightest. And that leads to them picking up their first loss in conference play on the road, which is kind of a trend this year. It's not news that it's tough to win on the road, but especially this year, there has been a massive home court advantage for the Big 12. And Kansas State going out to Colorado and getting taken down there. I honestly wasn't that surprised by it. I actually looked at it knowing they were going in without Ayoka and knowing that Colorado had beat West Virginia on their home court earlier in the season. I'm not particularly surprised. Colorado has been incredible at home. They're 4-0 at home in conference play. They're 0-4 on the road. So you want to talk about kind of stark contrasts. That is certainly a big one, but shaking things up a little bit at the top for sure.
So where does that leave us in Big 12 Player of the Year race at this point? If she's out and going to miss a significant amount of time, then as we've seen in years past, that takes her out of the running based off how much she's going to miss. Is it Sedona Prince? Is it Haley Van Lith? Is it a TCU player, especially if they go ahead and finish atop the standings at the end of the season?
Based on past experience, probably. And the really interesting and in a lot of ways difficult to predict thing is, as we talked about a little bit preseason, as I've talked about before the season, when you looked at kind of the preseason all Big 12 votes, when you looked at some of the preseason poll, you could really see the effect of having 8 new teams over the course of 2 years, because there is an extreme lack of familiarity for a lot of the coaches and teams within this league right now. And so that, in combination with the most unbalanced schedule the Big 12 has ever seen in basketball, where going in the course of 2 years from playing a double round robin to having on the women's side only 3 opponents that you see twice, you're going to have people with extremely different perspectives on who really is the most impactful, who is the player of the year. And in general, you already are going to have such a massive advantage being on the top team. It's extremely, extremely rare for a player of the year to come from a team outside of the top three. And so that's kind of what we're looking at right now, where a lot still depends on the second half of Big 12 play. Recency plays a pretty big factor a lot of the time, to my eye, in voting as well. But as of right now, you'd have to say that the front runners are coming from TCU, and with that being probably the two people that are statistically leading the way, which would be Sedona Prince and Haley Van Lith. And so obviously a lot depends on the latter half, the back half of the schedule here, but that certainly would be a safe assumption as of right now.
When you look at the schedule the rest of the way for TCU, they are beatable. They've lost twice. I mean, not much, but they are beatable. They've got road trips to Iowa State and Kansas State. They've got a road trip to Arizona, who is, has some games where they play well.
Just took down West Virginia at home and looked really good doing it, and can contend with size inside with 6'4" Bray Cunningham.
They've got West Virginia at home, and then they've got a return trip to Baylor. They just played Baylor on Sunday. So they do have some potential roadblocks and road bumps and hiccups on the schedule the rest of the way. So I look at this and I say, I still put TCU as the favorite. With Aoka Lee out for a significant amount of time at Kansas State, that kind of knocks them down. Oklahoma State has been good. I mean, they've beaten TCU, they've beaten West Virginia, but when you have road losses at Houston and a loss at home to Kansas, I'm glad they can get up for big games and find ways to win. They also tend to drop games that you would circle and say maybe they shouldn't, given how well this team can play. Baylor's up and down, West Virginia's, everyone else feels more flawed than TCU at this point. So, I mean, if you were to take TCU at the field to say who's going to win this in the regular season, we'll take the tournament later. It's a whole other thing. I mean, who are you taking out of this?
Yeah, I mean, especially when you look at just statistically, as we said, obviously having a lot of wins built up will help this. But for TCU right now, you have two of the top 10 players in the country in win share, and that's Sedona Prince. She's third with 4.8. Haley Van Lith is down at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 with 4.2. That's two really strong front runners. So again, as of right now, I would say that it's TCU over the field, because you just don't have anyone else who has been so consistent with a team that's that consistent to really knock them off of that. The interesting thing with that is Sedona Prince is also very prone to injury. So is it possible for that to play a factor there as well? Perhaps, but her injury last year was significantly more fluky, where it was a thumb break as opposed to one of those recurring knee, leg, hip, whatever deals that we see from Aoka. So I would say it's significantly less likely, but certainly could be playing a factor there. And then you have newcomer of the year, of course, for Haley Van Lith, pretty close to locked up. You'd have to see a lot of changes there for that to change, which could open it up to she can take newcomer of the year, and so then people vote for Sedona for player of the year. You kind of see some of that split there. But yeah, right now TCU has certainly put themselves in a really good position for that. Also, I should say, if K-State can stay right there atop the rankings, Serena Sundell would have a very, very compelling case, in my opinion, if she can kind of lead the team and steer them in Aoka's absence. The issue there being that she is not flashy. She is not talked about nearly enough. And so when you look at just perception and people voting, I think that it would be tough for her to end up getting enough votes to win it. But I think there's a good chance that she could be, in a lot of people's eyes, a deserving candidate. But she's going to have kind of an uphill climb there.
Looking around the rest of the conference, who's the team that surprised you the most so far this year?
Oh, that's very easy, and you're very familiar. It's Oklahoma State. I've been blown away by just the completeness of their team. Like, to have a team that is able to win difficult games, to do it in different ways. The pieces that they brought in around the existing players that they already knew how great they could be. They knew their capabilities. They know Staley Hurd can do, I mean, essentially anything you ask of her. She can play any position on the floor. The only limiting factor for her being her height, playing against post players, because the toughness, the skill, the strength, all of that she has. So her versatility is very nearly unmatched. And you had Ana Garcia, who is coming back and who has at times struggled, especially offensively this year, but has still found ways to contribute because they brought in so many tremendous players around her. Around them, you bring in a freshman, Jane Wooten, who I've said I'm a really big fan of. Really brings a lot off the bench and was extremely decisive. Was probably the key player for Oklahoma State, being able to take down TCU. And so to go into the portal, we talked a little bit here right before we were recording. I said I wasn't sure about their portal pickups this offseason, especially after last year where you had just some very clear just pieces that didn't fit. You had multiple players leave the team early in the season that had just joined from the portal. And so that certainly raises some red flags. But then this year, they got some names that were not talked about much, no one was really looking at their pickups and saying, oh, wow, that's who they got. But they took kind of the Iowa State men's basketball approach to finding the players that are going to fit into your style, into your needs, that are going to be a cultural fit. And it has paid tremendous dividends. They've had a couple hiccups, as you kind of mentioned, but they've had a lot more success. And over the course of the season, the expectations have risen so significantly because they keep proving that they can live up to and exceed the expectations that had already been set. So I've been really, really impressed with them. Really excited to see again how they finish in the back half. And then they're a team that's going to be extremely interesting to watch in the postseason because they do have depth, they do have balance, they do have a very complete roster. And so they have certainly a lot of potential.
Baylor's been solid enough so far this year. I've been pleasantly surprised by how good West Virginia has been. The team, obviously, with the newcomers of Utah, Colorado, Arizona State, I didn't have a lot of expectations, just because of I haven't followed them. It's hard to follow them coming in. I did most of my research on football and other sports, and so I've been really surprised by Utah this season. And they were a top 25 team at one point. They've been a really solid team throughout the season. 6-3 in the standings, 15-5 overall. What are your thoughts on this Utah, the program as a whole, and then just this team this year?
Yeah, Utah did not really surprise me, but again, I'm someone who obviously watches a lot of women's basketball and is extremely keen. I thought they were picked a little bit low.
Oh.
Yeah, here and there. Even with the fact that like watching the Pac-12 was you had to sacrifice a couple limbs, sell your soul, promise a firstborn to find any given game, and be able to watch it last year. But no, Utah returned a lot of production. I think that the effect of Alyssa Peely graduating made people really discount them, but outside of her, which is a big outside of her, like obviously she did a lot, but they returned so much. So Utah is really impressive, especially to do what they've done when not only is kind of your star the center of your team graduating last year, but then you have your coach taking a WNBA job early in the season. And so certainly a lot of kind of interesting situations there. Have one of their key players get injured in the game at Iowa State, actually, and she's been out since then, Jen McQueen. And so to continue to succeed even with one of your key players, one of your starters out, has been really impressive. I talked briefly about how it's really tough to win on the road. That's going to be the big separator for a lot of these teams, is if you can pick up even a couple games on the road, if you can, first of all, take care of business against opponents that you're favored against on the road. And then, man, if you can pick up a road upset, that is like gold in this conference right now. And Utah's one of the teams that have been able to do that because they came into Ames and they beat Iowa State. And so the fact that they were able to do that, went to BYU this weekend, and BYU has struggled, but they are a fairly capable team. I do think they're better than their record indicates, sitting at 1-7 right now. I think a little bit of that is that they have had a tough start, just as far as kind of figuring out their rotations and figuring out, what exactly their identity is. They also had a good number of road games that they ended up losing against opponents that they probably could have beat at home. They've got a couple of games here on the back half of the schedule. They get UCF at home. They go to Arizona State. That would be a really big one for BYU to be able to pick up. But anyway, close game. Utah's at BYU over the weekend, and they end up pulling it out. So they're doing the little things to put themselves in a really good position. And so definitely going to be one of those teams that maybe not winning the conference, especially with the kind of separation that TCU and K-State have so far, but they're going to have the ability to play spoiler in a big way. And if they can continue to take care of business and get themselves sort of rolling as we near the end of this regular season, they're just such a well-coached, solid program that they're the kind of team that people never want to see late in the season.
I think the Big 12 is really interesting this season. I think, but here's where we're gonna get all negative and complain and blah 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 blah. I think the Big 12 is really interesting this season. I think you've got some good teams in TCU. Kansas State obviously better with Aoka Lee. I think Oklahoma State's a nice surprise. I think Baylor is solid, but definitely not what Baylor used to be. I think West Virginia is better than their 16-4 record maybe indicates, and I think you've got some fun teams like Utah and Iowa State who've got some spunk and opportunity. And yet I still feel like we're going to have the conversation come March where the bracket's announced and we're sitting here upset because it's 16 SEC teams and like 5 Big 12 teams, and one of the TCU's got a really good seed. No, TCU somehow still ends up as a 3 seed behind 7 SEC teams, and everyone else is like a 7 or an 8. And congratulations on your great seed. Enjoy traveling to Stanford or to LSU or to insert other team where you're going to not get past the second round because it's way too hard to do it on the road.
Yeah, it's the really difficult and frustrating thing is for me with kind of dual perspectives as someone who is very much a fan of the Big 12 as a whole, someone who is very engaged with the Big 12, and someone who, works with Iowa State, someone who covers that team. It's frustrating, but especially this year, my frustration is a lot of it was brought on to the conference by the teams themselves. There are a lot of teams that played awful non-conference schedules. I mean, abysmal. And people give LSU a lot of flack nationally for doing that. And then they get boosted by playing in the SEC. And so their strength of schedule increases a pretty good amount. But they already had that perception of being better. And frankly, they mostly take care of business. Yeah, they played a terrible non-conference schedule, but they just lost their first game. In the Big 12, you have a lot of teams that did not really give themselves many challenges at all, tanked their strength of schedule ratings. And then when you do lose a game or two in the non-conference, it snowballs where you don't have as many opportunities to pick up other games. It makes people nationally look down on you and discount it. And so it's very, very frustrating. I do think that, as we've discussed extensively, a lot of it is perception. And so there is just this intrinsic boost given to really the other three power conferences in women's basketball. But by not doing themselves favors, the Big 12, I mean, you're, again, I keep talking about uphill battles. You're already fighting an uphill battle. So you have to give yourself opportunities to make people notice you, make people talk about you. And this year, a lot of teams didn't give themselves any of those opportunities. And then some of the ones that did weren't able to capitalize. I mean, Iowa State played a nightmarish non-conference and wasn't able to get any of the wins. You had TCU playing South Carolina, losing. You had Kansas State playing Duke, losing. The Big 12 just frankly didn't really have any signature non-conference wins to boost themselves. And so it's really tough, because usually I have a couple things that I can logically push back and say, but look at this game, but look at that game. This year, there just weren't that many. And part of it, too, I will say, is like Oklahoma State is so much better than anyone, including maybe the program, anticipated them being. So they didn't play a very good non-conference schedule. And so that's just kind of the way things go. But you got to be able to give yourself opportunities to boost that. And this year, the Big 12 did not do that.
Well, you live and you learn, and hopefully they'll adjust next year. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. I think the men have a similar problem outside of about 3 teams, but we'll see. Jamie, always a pleasure. Love having you on. We're gonna wrap this up and listen to my interview with Kelley Ford. Before we do, my good friend, plug it all.
Oh man! Well,
yeah,
so
I give you is 5 minutes enough to plug everything?
Oh my gosh! Yeah, no, I'm not doing quite enough to fill all that time, unless I get sidetracked and start talking about something else. But no, I'm over at Her Hoop Stats. We put out a weekly show called The Press Break, so that we talk all women's basketball. Right now, primarily college women's basketball. We sprinkle in a little bit of Unrivaled. We sprinkle in some WNBA. Trades are happening in the W right now, so we'll get into that a little bit. Some crazy ones were announced today, but that's kind of the primary thing. And then obviously call it all the games for Iowa State, so that's kind of available online if you are so inclined to, like, I don't know, listen to the radio just to hear me yap and say really wild stuff about Iowa State. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at here, and then we'll be back. We play next Sunday, so I'll be back here at some point to catch back up on Big 12. But yeah, I'll always be throwing in some mentions over at the Press Break.
Appreciate it. All right, and of course we'll be back. We will be back Thursday. We'll be back Thursday because it's time to start kicking off softball coverage because softball season starts next week. So I've got one interview in the can. One, fingers crossed, happens, and we'll start softball coverage. But coming up next, our good friend Kelley Ford, KFord Ratings. We're going to talk a little Big 12 men's hoops. Y'all, stay healthy, stay safe, enjoy your week.
Head to Whole Foods Market to jumpstart your January during our New Year boosting event with savings on feel-good favorites store-wide. Save on organic picks, wellness staples, and more all month long.
If you've listened to the show before, you know this guy well.
We have him on all the time to talk football, especially before the season, during, and after. Today, though, we're not talking football. We're talking basketball, which is not usually why we have our good friend Kelley Ford, aka KFord Ratings, on the show. But today we're going to do it. Kelley, welcome back to the 1012 friend.
Hey, Phillip, thanks for having me. As always, it's good to talk Big 12, regardless of topic. I just love this conference. I love diving in, and I'm excited to talk college basketball with you today.
Well, look, the fans of this conference love you, or at least love engaging with you, which has always been great. I think you've always done a good job and a fair job covering the Big 12. Now, like I said, we're used to talking to you about football. I think it was last year you started putting out power ratings for basketball as well. And I feel like most fans have a pretty good grasp on your power ratings from a football standpoint. Obviously, you're still going to get, chuckleheads and biased individuals and whatever, because it's social media. But I feel like football wise, most people are going to engage in a good way and have a fair understanding of what it is that you do and understand that you're not like sitting here just showing bias. Basketball, I feel like people get way angrier about your basketball graphics and about your basketball power ratings than they do football anymore. Why do you think that is?
I think it's twofold, Phillip. One, just from a general sense, I think most people that are following me on social media where this upset and outrage is stemming from, right? Most people on there are familiar with the football stuff. They trust the football stuff because I've been doing it publicly, and that's important to note publicly, but doing it longer. So I think there's just built up goodwill there. And then they see the basketball kind of on the football graphic overlay, right? Same color schemes, same kind of layout and format. And they're like, wait a minute now, what's this basketball all about? And so I think it's going to take a little bit of time. Like you said, I've been doing the March Madness predictions for quite some time every March, but the actual week in, week out power ratings, that's a bit newer to the public platform. And so it's going to take a little while to build that up. I think specifically the second point, though, for Big 12 fans, because you're right, I have really enjoyed engaging with these fan bases by and large, 95% positive interactions, which is pretty darn good on a social media platform. I'm not going to complain about that. I think they've taken a little bit more exception here, and I think it strikes closer to home. I'm not saying the Big 12 is not a football conference. It is a football conference. It is one of, if not my favorite football conferences because of the parity, because we never know what's going to happen. You look at the title game this year and, of course, the champions, Arizona State. What a story. That was incredible. The Big 12 is a football conference. I'm going to say out of the same mouth, though, it really, really is a basketball conference. And I think the fan bases here are rabid. They know their teams are good. They think they should be number one. Of course, you can only have one team atop the national or conference standings. So I just think the chances to upset people is a little bit higher in basketball, in the Big 12 in particular, because you look at the brands of basketball in this conference, you look at the quality of the teams, you look at the coaches, you just look at how successful this conference has been at basketball, both in the recent history and long term. And I can understand why people get fired up. So I'm going to take the same approach. I'm going to be objective. I'm going to filter out the things that I don't think matter. I'm going to hone in on what I do think are predictive elements of basketball. But I think that might be the reason that we get a little bit more outrage, at least for now, on the basketball side than on the football side.
So help just so everyone remembers, because every podcast is hopefully someone's first, right? We like to attract new people all the time. How do your power ratings, because I think the word rating and ranking gets interchanged too often, right? And we try and educate everyone that there is a difference between a rating and a ranking. Explain how your ratings work. How do you put those together? How do you come up with the numbers that you have?
Absolutely. And so this is consistent for either football or basketball, really whatever it is that we're doing. A power rating, just to be clear for folks, is looking forward. Which team is projecting to be the strongest? Which team would be favored against what other team and by how many points? Again, football, basketball, whatever sport we're discussing. A ranking, you can have a ranking of power ratings. For example, my number one power rated team right now in the Big 12 is Houston. Iowa State is very, very close at number 2. So you could say Kelley has Houston power rating ranked number 1. But that doesn't mean that I would rank Houston number one if I'm filling out an AP poll ballot or if I'm trying to determine, which team should get the best seeds in the NCAA tournament. A ranking looks backwards, and that is judging what is the quality of your resume relative to what would be expected given the schedule you've played. So power rating looks forward, resume ranking looks backwards, and that's really the difference there. You've asked the question, what goes into the power ratings? What are you taking into account? In the sport of basketball in particular, it is highly, highly dependent on your efficiency. And that's your efficiency both on offense and on defense. So essentially boil it down to 10 seconds or less. How many points per possession are you scoring? How many points per possession are you conceding on the defensive side of the floor? And then you, of course, have to adjust for the opponent faced as well as the location of the game. You're expected to be better at home than you are on the road, for example. And then in basketball, too, because it's possession based, approximately 70-ish possessions in a basketball game for either team, you have to adjust for tempo, too. Some teams like to run and get up and down the floor and increase that number of possessions. Some teams like to slow it down and keep that number down. That gets factored into the model as well. So, in football, we talk about Bill Connolly, Brian Fremeau being kind of the pioneers. In college basketball, I really think there's only one. That's Ken Pomeroy. He's been doing it for more than 20 years now, doing it at a really high level. His numbers are on the team sheets for these teams come March. So I am trying to emulate what Ken Pomeroy is doing. Of course, you're not just copy and pasting and taking his exact approach. One, we don't know the exact approach, but two, you want to put your own flavor, your own spin. So I'm working on different things, theories, running down ideas to see what matters and what doesn't in men's basketball in terms of a power rating. And it's been a really fun project to publicly be producing for the last two seasons now.
I mean, you have the same order as Ken Pom through the first 6 teams in the Big 12. I mean, so like there's some comparable comparisons there. Obviously, everyone's a little bit different. Your graphics include projected seed lines, which I think is really interesting. People were some fans were complaining about things about Monday's release, which was funny to me because I kept looking at me like, you're grapping about something when the information you're grapping about is right there, readily available if you just look at it. And I guess they just didn't understand what that meant. They didn't understand.
All good.
Reading comprehension sometimes is hard, and I get it. So I want to start with your contenders in the Big 12 right now, based off power rating at this moment. Like you mentioned, you have Houston number 1, Iowa State number 2, Kansas number 3. Now, again, this is not a ranking, it's a rating. Similarly, you look at Ken Pom. Houston is number 3 overall, Iowa State number 4 overall, Kansas number 8 overall. We're not going to worry about seed line things. This is just focusing on the Big 12 and projecting forward. Looking at these 3 teams, let's start with them before we talk about anybody else. Why do you view Houston as better than Iowa State? Or what? Let me rephrase that. Not you. I apologize. Why do your numbers have it broken down? Houston, Iowa State, and Kansas. Before we dive in, like I do want to note, like Houston has a 23.1, Iowa State at 21.2, Kansas an 18.9. So there is some significant amounts between each of those teams.
And I'll start right there with those numbers you just read. Those are points per game above the Division I average in men's college basketball. So 364 teams, I think we have now. That's saying that Houston is 23.1 points better than the average team in college basketball, Division I college basketball, if they were to play on a neutral field. Neutral court, excuse me. Got to get out of the football phrases. Neutral court. If Houston were to play that team on a neutral court, I'd have them favored by 23 points. So you mentioned the differences there. Put that another way for these 3 teams in context. On a neutral court, I would have Houston as a 2-point favorite over Iowa State, Houston as a 4-point favorite over Kansas. Now, the home court advantage in college basketball, that's going to vary by venue, but on average, it can be about three-ish points. So if Iowa State's hosting Houston, I'm making Iowa State a very small favorite in that game. So just to put some context around the differences between these teams, because they all are top 10 in my power ratings ranking, if you will, nationally, and they are the top 3 in the Big 12. So what gives Houston the slightest of edges right now? It's the defense. And Phillip, we're going to talk about any given team almost. There's a couple exceptions here, but for the most part, teams in the Big 12 conference play really, really good defense. All 3 of these teams we're discussing, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, rank in the top 5 of my defensive metrics, which At this stage, I'm not publishing publicly, but those that have been following for a while know I didn't always used to publish it on the football side either. I now do publish the offense and defense ratings and rankings. So that could be coming in basketball in the future. All three of these are top five, but Houston's number one. I mean, Houston has, by my numbers, essentially the most efficient defense in the entire country, and that's adjusting for location, opponent, tempo, all of those different things. You look at the offenses here, they're pretty similar. Iowa State's got a top 10 offense, Houston's top 15-ish. So yes, Iowa State is better on the offensive side, but the difference for me is Houston is simply that much better on the defensive side, not just than Iowa State or Kansas, but really anybody. That to me right now is what gives Houston the edge. And I will say, for those that have been following for a while or keeping up with the March Madness predictions for a while, my model has been high on Houston the last few years. I mean, I picked the Cougars to win the national championship in March Madness a couple times in the last, 3 or 4 years. They've obviously advanced to the Final Four back in 2021, I think it was, that tournament in Indianapolis. And so this is a really good team, and they've really figured out how to play basketball at a high level, and the model really respects that and appreciates that. You could flip that around and say maybe the model's too high on the Cougars, and that's shown out over the years. I just think they get into the tournament, they'll have a bad game, they'll catch a hot opponent, whatever it is. I like Houston's chances moving into the month of March to be a contender late in that tournament. Iowa State probably going to have a better seed path, at least as things stand right now, so I expect the Cyclones are going to be favorites to make it very far in that tournament as well, and you can never count out Bill Self in Kansas in March. That would be absolutely foolish. So all three of these teams are going to have a relatively high chance to advance to San Antonio in the Final Four this year.
You mentioned your defensive ratings. You mentioned Ken Pom. Ken Pom has Houston, the number one ranked defensive rating.
Yep.
Iowa State at number 6, Kansas at number 4. So 3 of the top 6 defenses come from the Big 12. That's just pretty standard. Now, we won't go into everybody else's defensive ratings around the Big 12, but those 3 in particular, which I think makes sense as to you look at those 3. We just listen to the defensive ratings, offensive ratings. Houston's number 13, Iowa State's number 10, Kansas number 34, which helps explain also why they're so much further behind the other ones. And there's some solid offenses in the Big 12 this year. Arizona at 16, Baylor at 15. And some of the defenses across the Big 12, Baylor, I think, is Baylor's down this year compared to what we expect from Baylor's defense. I think that shows with them being number 6 in your power rating. They're 59th ranked defense, according to Ken Pom. So that it makes a lot of sense. Outside of those 3 contenders, Houston, Iowa State, and Kansas, and I'm including Kansas in this because of all the different numbers and metrics and Kansas's history in the Big 12. Because if you ask me point blank, is Kansas a contender? They're to me, the last team as an option, and I'm not sure I entirely buy the idea of Kansas winning the Big 12 this season, just based off what we've seen so far. Now, granted, never count out Bill Self, never count out Kansas, never count out them losing 2 in a row and then going on a 10-game win streak because it's Kansas. Outside of those 3, though, do you see any other team who has a shot at contending?
I do. I'm going to give you 2. I'm going to touch on Kansas because I agree with you. And the reason to be down on them is that offense we talked about. It's top 35, top 40-ish, top 50 certainly. That needs to be better. If they're going to compete and win, the Big 12 championship, they're going to be going up against other really, really good defenses. That offense needs to improve down the stretch and, of course, to win a national championship as well. So I'm with you there on Kansas. I do think they belong in that top grouping. There's 2 teams that I think fall right after that, and that is Texas Tech and Arizona. You touched on Arizona there a little bit. I don't think, unless I missed it, you said anything about Texas Tech, and that's a top 10 offense as well, at least in my numbers right now. Now, they're kind of the inverse of Kansas. They need to improve on the defensive side. This is the team that I have highest power rated in the Big 12 that doesn't have a top 40, defense, let alone a top 5, like those first 3 contenders. So Texas Tech, they're scary enough on offense. If they can improve on defense, get some stops in critical moments during big games, they're going to be in every game because their offense is that good and is that efficient, at least to this point. If you're asking me, which would you rather have? I'd rather have a really good defense because on any given night, your shot making can be off. Something could just not feel right with the flow. Defense, like in football, typically that travels. And if you're good, solid defensively, you're probably going to be good and solid defensively, really, regardless of the location of the game, regardless of the stakes, regardless of who you're playing. Offense can be streaky. It can be hit or miss. Now, a high-flying offense will beat a good defense in college basketball, but a good defense is easier to replicate and maintain game over game. So if you're asking me which one would I prefer, I'd rather have a good defense, but it's really hard to win a national championship in basketball without an offense that is clicking, at least peaking in March. Arizona was the other one that we mentioned. I would make them about a 6-point underdog to Houston on a neutral floor right now. I think this team is really balanced. They're top 25-ish on both sides of the ball, so or on both ends of the court, I should say. So this is a team that, again, probably hasn't lived up to the expectation of the history of that program. They've gotten close a lot of times. When are they going to break through? When are they going to make that Final Four here? I'm excited for them. It's been since the 1997 team that won that national championship, I think it was. So Arizona is a good team. They're a good basketball brand. They're now in one of the best conferences in the country in basketball, of course. And so I think Arizona is certainly a team to contend with come March. I'll give you one more, Phillip, that's probably just a half step below those two, and that would be Baylor. You're right. They are down relative to what we've seen from them in recent years, what maybe we expect. They've struggled on the defensive side. The offense is still pretty darn good, but on the defensive end of the court, that's where they've struggled. If Coach Drew can get them going and get that end figured out, they've got the metal, they've got the makeup to make a run in March, but they're definitely, for me, kind of in that third tier, if you will, of contenders. And that's probably where I draw the line. Not to say a team below that couldn't get hot and go on a run, but it would be more surprising if anybody outside those top 6 were to be the ones representing the Big 12 as the AQ or the last team standing in March from this conference.
Yeah, you're calling Texas Tech is right here. Ken Palm, number 7 offense, number 40 defense. Arizona was mentioned number 16 on offense, number 29 on defense. So they seem more balanced on both sides, but they're not great at either one. They're just really good on both sides of the ball. And Baylor, 15 offense, 59 on defense. I just having watched some Baylor, and I haven't watched every game. Don't get me wrong. It just doesn't. It's not the scary Baylor. It's still a really good Baylor. Please understand. But there's a difference between really good and scary good. They are a really good team. They are not a scary good team this year. Texas Tech is interesting team to me. Like I love that they keep pointing out that the 4-0 on the road in the Big 12, 4 on the road in the Big 12, 4 on the road, and which is the first time they've ever done that in program history. It's hard to win in the Big 12. They're 1-2 at home in Big 12 play with losses to UCF and Iowa State. Iowa State makes sense. They were in that game. I actually thought they probably should have won it. You have that 1-point loss overtime game. I watched the end of it. It was a crazy wild game. The UCF loss is just weird. Like, it's a good Texas Tech team as long as they can figure out how to get the stops, because the offense is there. You're right. I kind of wonder.
Don't miss out on the final football game of the season with Prize Picks. Join now because Prize Picks are giving away a free pick for the big game where 1 yard equals 1 win. Just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Download the Prize Picks app and use code FIELD and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FIELD on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
I kind of wonder if this is a Houston-Iowa State race to me. I like Arizona. Texas Tech feels like the wild card to me more than Kansas does.
I think that's fair. And Texas Tech, when you look at it, Phillip, I agree with you. And again, it's because they have this top end on offense. And like I said, in order to win in March, yes, you need good defense, and you need good defense to get to March. But it's the team that's going to be clicking on all cylinders in March, and that's really hard to do. I mean, there's a reason winning 6 straight games in March and hoisting that trophy, only one team does it every single year. But this team has the potential on the offensive side, the efficiency that they play with, and the shot selection they get, the shots that they make. You've seen they can go into tough environments. You talked about their record on the road, little confounding, the home record there. But Texas Tech is the wild card team, and you're right. When I posted the graphic of I update college basketball numbers every single Monday morning. The model is constantly running and evaluating. it takes a bit of work for me on the basketball side because of the number of teams to publicly produce the graphics and numbers for a public update. So I only do it once a week. Maybe as we get closer to March Madness and now that the college football is over, I could do, twice or I'll just say twice. I'm not going to beyond that. Maybe twice a week I'll be able to do that. But on Monday, I posted the graphic. Texas Tech, number 4 power rated team in the Big 12, is number 12 nationally. It tells you how good the Big 12 is. But they were projected by the Bracket Matrix, which is a website out there for those not familiar that compiles all of these bracketologist projections. And so it's gives you a pretty good indicator of what's the true seed of this team going to be based on all the information out there. Texas Tech was a 10 seed. I mean, they were one of the last 4 buys on Monday. Now, that has since improved because that last update from the Bracket Matrix was before the weekend, I believe. It's now, they've run an update as of Tuesday. It's now showing an 8 next to Texas Tech. But regardless, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, Arizona, Baylor, even West Virginia, a team we haven't talked about yet, even West Virginia so far has a better resume than Texas Tech. Therefore, they have a better projected seed in the tournament. So you want to talk about Texas Tech being a wild card for the reasons I've already listed, and you have too. How about the fact that they might be coming from an untraditional spot of the bracket? I mean, if they're an 8 seed and they get matched up against, a 1 seed, then it would be in the second round. Texas Tech could go crashing out of the tournament. And they're a really, really good team. Or maybe they pull off that upset and they're the first, they upset the one, and the first one to go down is to Texas Tech. And now that path opens up, right? So there's a lot about March Madness that depends on your seed, your path, all of those different things, what upsets happen around you. Texas Tech is a wild card, I think, for that reason as well. They are a highly, highly power-rated team that so far does not have the resume to go with that power rating. Therefore, they have a lower projected seed as of now. Still a lot of basketball to play, but that's where Texas Tech is for now.
Texas Tech's problem, the same problem it is every year. Non-conference strength of schedule, according to KenPom, 325th in the country out of 364 schools. So it's just a good old-fashioned Texas Tech special that they don't ever seem to get rid of. Okay, you mentioned West Virginia. Some of getting you on was, of course, spurred by the fan base that you have had the most back and forth with. First on football, I think they've come around. Now on basketball is West Virginia fans who were very upset about your graphic on Monday, having them 8th behind Cincinnati. Now, granted, you have them as a 7 seed on Monday. If you go and look at Bracket Matrix, it projects them as a 6 seed right now, the top 6 seed. Texas Tech, by the way, you mentioned is currently an 8. They're like the last 8 seed, so they're like 1 spot out of a 9. And then, of course, West Virginia goes and loses to Arizona State at home on Tuesday, which was a bit confounding. I get with fans when you have good wins saying, no, this team is being discounted. I get it. You've got a win over Arizona. You've got the only Big 12 win over Iowa State, which was huge. You've got the win over Gonzaga. You have some really good wins. You also have some pretty ugly losses to balance those out. Blown out by Arizona in the second meeting, this one at home, blown out at Houston. Again, we just mentioned you lost at home to Arizona State by 8. You lost to Pitt on the road by like 20. Again, it's early in the season. I don't think Pitt's especially great this year. Help me with West Virginia here. Help West Virginia fans so that they can maybe be a little bit less angry with you based off of how they're getting power rated, specifically behind Cincinnati. Just talk about West Virginia first, and we'll compare the two teams.
Sounds good. Can do. And so you talked about the resume a little bit too. There's a publicly available website where you can look at every team's, net ranking, and it breaks it down. Then if you click on them, you can see their team sheet. Essentially, you're going to see what the committee's looking at. And so for West Virginia, you're 4-4 in quad 1, you're 1-1 in quad 2. That Arizona State game that you mentioned there, that is the worst loss, just happened on Tuesday night. That is the worst loss for West Virginia so far this year. But then you're clean, so to speak. It means you're undefeated in quads 3 and quads 4. So that's really good from the committee standpoint. So there's really only one loss that you're really looking at, and that's the Arizona State loss. That's potentially damaging, but it is quad 2, so the committee probably not going to frown on that too much. You're talking about from a power rating standpoint, though, what's the difference? Well, to be very, very clear, again, when I ran the update on Monday, Cincinnati had a power rating of 12.6. West Virginia had a power rating of 12.3. That means there is a 0.3 basketball points per game difference in the model's eyes between Cincinnati and West Virginia. These two teams are very, very comparable. Cincinnati number 36 nationally, West Virginia number 38 nationally. Very, very similar. West Virginia fans got very upset they were behind Cincinnati. Yeah, they are. I pointed at it and said, you're right, they are behind them. I would say take it with a grain of salt. That's very, very close. They're close enough that, honestly, the results of one night, now West Virginia didn't have a good night Tuesday, the result of one night could flip that. I mean, that's how close these two teams are. What's the difference between these two teams? Or I'll get to that in a second. You asked about West Virginia in particular. I like the defense. It's a top 25, top 30 efficiency-based defense on that end of the floor. I have concerns about the West Virginia offense and their ability to consistently play at a level that I think is required to really make noise either in the Big 12 or in the NCAA tournament. The West Virginia offense for me right now, in my kind of offensive end of the court rankings, if you will, from a power rating standpoint, is around 100. I mean, you've bounced over 100, sneak under 100. West Virginia is about number 100 on the offensive end of the floor. That is not good enough right now to say that West Virginia is going to be a contender that makes a deep run, even if they are, a number 6 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's certainly, you're going to have an opportunity to make a run. Not if you're playing at the number 100 level on that end of the floor. So that's what the model's suggesting. The defense is good enough to win, to keep you in every game and win some games for you. But the offense is going to have to play at a higher level on that end of the court if they're going to be able to make a run there. And so to contrast it with Cincinnati, they're even worse on offense. I mean, they're sub 100, certainly. But the defense is significantly better. The defense is top 10 for me for Cincinnati. I said it was about top 25, top 30-ish for West Virginia. So the difference right now in that 0.3 is Cincinnati is better by a slightly greater margin on defense than West Virginia is better than the Bearcats on offense, if that makes sense. But it's very, very close to a wash. If they played on a neutral court, I would make it a pick 'em. And I'm sure West Virginia fans would say, I'm taking the Mountaineers. Cincinnati fans would say, I'm taking the Bearcats. And that's where we'd end up.
Don't call it a rivalry. That's what I've been told by West Virginia fans. Look, Ken Palm has West Virginia 43, Cincinnati 44. So literally it's one spot apart, flipped. West Virginia with the 96th ranked in offense, 19th ranked defense. Cincinnati with the 127th ranked offense, the 10th ranked defense. Yeah. And you go look at the net ratings. Hey, guess what? West Virginia's 5 total spots ahead of Cincinnati. 5 spots. That's not a significant amount. So, I mean, this is flip a coin kind of situation. And until these two teams face off in, again, what is not a rivalry game, as I've been told time and time again. And the lucky thing for West Virginia, they get to face each other twice, once in Morgantown and once in Cincinnati. The first one is in Cincinnati on February 2nd. So we've got a little bit of time before we get to that game, but it's coming up pretty quick. And so, look, we'll solve this on the court, like real easy.
Absolutely. Real easy. Absolutely. If you want to quibble about it, I'll listen to it. But like you said, and you mentioned some KenPom numbers there, you mentioned the net. They're very similar from a power rating standpoint. They just have slightly different strengths. I mean, they're both better on defense, but the strengths and weaknesses are slightly exaggerated depending on which side of the court you're talking about.
If they want to complain about something, they can go and say, well, how come we're only 0.1 points better than BYU? And I would go, well, KenPom has BYU 5 spots higher than West Virginia. So, we can
goes both ways.
There's a grouping of 3 teams right there that are all kind of, it's the 3 Spider-Man meme, like different costumes. They can be different costumes, like one's, but it's still Spider-Man's. Like you're all still doing the pointing.
Now, BYU's interesting, Philip. I know we're not spending a lot of time here, but BYU's interesting because they're better on offense than they are on the offensive side of the floor than they are on defense. So they're a little bit inverted from Cincinnati and West Virginia, but from an overall team power rating, yes, absolutely, all within about half a point in my model.
Yeah, KenPom has BYU 28th on offense, 65th on defense. So, which kind of lines up. All right, Kelley, as always, it is an absolute pleasure. Everybody, just remember, you are welcome to engage with Kelley on social media when he posts these things. And I try and share them on Blue Sky on our account when I can, and I remember to do so. You can engage with Kelley all you want. Please feel free to do so. He enjoys having the conversation. But, don't be a jerk. Don't get all in your feels about how dare you, sir, not view things through the same colored lenses that I do based off my fandom. And how can you, that's like going to gripe at KenPom. Like, how could you have so-and-so ahead of it? Like, it's about numbers. Okay. It's a rating. It's not a personal opinion thing. It's why I post very few any sorts of rankings about things, except softball, which we got coming out because I have strong feelings about that as always. So, Kelley, when you start doing softball power ratings as well, I mean, we'll make sure to get you on for that. But where can everybody check out all of the great work you do covering now, of course, football and men's basketball?
You never know what the future holds, Philip. If I'm able to make the predictive analytics work more of a full-time thing instead of a hobby, there's no limit on the sports we could bring under the umbrella. So that would be exciting. Thanks for having me on. As always, I will say from the engagement side, yes, please do engage. I'm always happy to. There's also times that my own personal opinion of a team in basketball, in football, it differs from the model. And so it's not like, oh, this is Bible, this is gospel, this is what it is. Sometimes I disagree with my own model, and that's okay. People can have their own opinions. If you are over the top, Philip, I actually don't mind anymore because I just hit that mute button. I used to not do it. Now I do. So, hey, if you come at me, more power to you. You're probably going to get muted, and we'll move on from there. And then you're kind of just screaming into the wind. But it's all good. You can find me on X at KFord Ratings. You can find the website, KFordRatings.com. Essentially, everything I'm posting is in those areas. The basketball content is going to roll on here through March, of course, maybe even pick up in terms of the number of updates, as I mentioned, each week. I can't promise that, but that's a possibility. The college football stuff, probably more some historical look back, some comparisons of programs, teams, in 2024, how was it relative to their average the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is, until we get really to May, where we can, after the spring transfer portal window, we'll get some 2025 projections up for college football teams. That'll be really fun. But for the next few months, certainly focus on basketball as we charge towards March, and the Big 12 is very well positioned. So, Philip, I appreciate you having me on. It's always a pleasure. This is a great podcast, and I love being a part of it whenever I can.
Kelley, but seriously, buddy, it's always a pleasure to have you on. You do great work. One thing I want to operate on, or an idea I want to have this offseason, and I'll see if you can contribute to it, is the idea that for the first time in a very long time, the Big 12 does not have we're going to meme that team, like a team so bad that they are meme worthy. A program that is a laughing stock, right? Because Kansas is finally solid. We could talk about the missing a bowl game this year, but like you have a respectable Kansas program. Year 2 for Colorado under Deion Sanders was a good team. Like I think there's a case to be made with Houston continuing to get better. Like teams have bad years, but there's currently not a look at them program in the Big 12 compared to like teams in the Big 10 that are still kind of the SEC has a case for the same argument with the way Vanderbilt had looked this year. But I think for the first time in a long time, the bottom of the Big 12 is better than it's ever been, and there's no meme team.
Yeah, I'm quickly looking here, and I don't disagree with you. The worst team this year in 2024 from a power rating standpoint for me, Arizona, Oklahoma State. Now, Oklahoma State, of course, Mike Gundy, a bad year down here. Don't expect that to repeat. Arizona, just a year off of a great year under Jed Fish. Of course, new coach, see if they can establish that culture, underachieve. But you're right. There's not, from a power rating standpoint, Houston was down there this year, but you'll see what they can get going in year 2. There was not a bad team for many years. You're right. It was Kansas. Iowa State has had their time in that spotlight. Of course, both of those programs on very upward trajectories at this stage. So yeah, I like that. Certainly happy to dive more into it in the future with you. I would even say from the SEC, they might not have a team. You said Mississippi State, they weren't bad. They weren't bad from a quality standpoint, but you went 2-10. And look at the wins they had. It was Eastern Kentucky and UMass. So FCS, Eastern Kentucky, and UMass, who's in the 120s in the power rating. That's not good.
Who's an FCS team playing FBS football?
Yeah, that's just not good, man. So I think the case could be made if between Mississippi State or those Big 12 teams. I said I'd probably do the point and laugh at Mississippi State before I did the Big 12. So I love that. That's a great way to think about it, and I hadn't done that before.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built. 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge, from worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.